Welcome to In Focus with Ejaz Haider. We have one big story tonight, the discovery of an Indian disinformation operation so vast and complex that it boggled even the investigators. EU Disinfo Lab, an independent non-profit organization whose mission is to monitor and unearth digital fakery. Let me just quote from the foreword from the report itself to give the viewers some idea of what we are talking about. Members of our team all share a common trait, an eye for the fake and a drive to uncover it. But never before in our investigations have we been so astonished at the multiplication of layers of fake. Indian Chronicles resurrected dead media, dead think tanks and NGOs. It even resurrected dead people. The actors behind this operation hijacked the names of others and tried to impersonate regular media and press agencies such as the EU Observer, The Economist, and Voice of America. They used the letterhead of the European Parliament, registered websites under avatars with fake phone numbers, and provided fake addresses to the United Nations. Indian Chronicles also organized supposedly multi-stakeholder events where, in essence, everyone speaking was tied to them. They misappropriated the picture of a former UK government minister and BBC director on Facebook, registered the names of deceased persons to attend events 5 years after their death, and invented dozens of journalist identities. They used layers of fake media that would quote and republish one another. They used politicians who genuinely wanted to defend women or minority rights to ultimately serve geopolitical interests, and gave a platform to far-right politicians when their objectives converged. Even our full report does not mention everything we uncovered, and it is with regret, but for the sake of legibility, that we had to leave many other findings aside. Ironically, this level of fakery may be the very reason why the operation could last for so long. How could anyone imagine that this is even possible? This is to remind the viewer again straight from the report's forward. Anyone even reading the executive summary will be gobsmacked by the extent of this operation. It is a matter of much consternation that the scale of this story has been lost on the electronic media in Pakistan, which have mostly underreported and underanalyzed what this op has been about. With that, let's dive right into tonight's discussion. We begin with Dr. Moeed, Yusuf, Special Assistant to the Prime Minister on National Security and Chairman of Strategic Policy Planning. We also have with us Ramsha Jahangi, a tech journalist who has reported on this story. I'll begin with Dr. Yusuf so Ramsha can also listen in, and then get to her so she can lay out for us the sheer magnitude of this operation. Thank you, Moeed, for being on the program. Let me begin with the obvious. So, EU Disinfo Lab first unearthed Indian disinformation activities in 2019, but those activities have continued through new fake organizations. This has been going on for 15 years. Why could we not get wind of this operation with all our intel paraphernalia, while a non-profit organization could?
I'm not sure you can say we didn't have wind of it. Frankly, the way these things work is that you pick up pieces of the puzzle. As things go along, something is going on, you realize intel agencies all over the world operate this way. I even mentioned in my presser, if you recall, that the 2019 episode, we were already aware after looking at that, much before this report came out, that it was a raw operation at the end of the day. And also remember that this is not happening in isolation. This is happening while what we've put out in our dossier, direct support of terrorism in Pakistan. These are all linked. That's what hybrid warfare is at the end of the day. So it's not that we or any other intelligence agencies don't know, it's how you piece the puzzle together. And there, quite frankly, because this outfit is sitting on EU territories, will have more access to the people there, and the kind of allegations and the kind of facts they've put out, sometimes actually they're in a better place to do. But I have no doubt that our system very much is aware of what India is doing. And it is not true, I think, to say that all of this continued and we didn't know. Actually, a lot of this is neutralized behind the scenes. It's just that these are not things that come out in public. And frankly, even I, of course, will not have all the information on what was neutralized and what wasn't. But let's not take our eye off the ball. That's the real issue here. The real issue is you are dealing with a rogue state, which is really a mafia more than a state at this point, and has been for a while. This is not only this Indian government. This has been going on for 15 years. That's what we need to focus on. How do you now take this to its logical conclusion and make sure that the state and the people involved are punished according to international law, international norms, and international customs?
Right, precisely. 15 years. That's what I said in my opening also. That's what the report talks about. And after the 2019 expose, nothing really changed. I mean, they have continued. So I'm not sure how much we've been able to neutralize them. So allow me to press the earlier point. And also because we keep talking about fifth generation war, which includes obviously weaponization of information. And yet we needed an EU-based organization to do our work for us. What does it say about our own capacity? There's not going to be the end of such operations.
Well, as I said, these are complicated matters, and you won't get public information on what states and intelligences and the state apparatus of any country is doing behind the scenes. That said, there is no question that all countries of the world are expanding their capacities, are trying to make sure that they have their bases covered when it comes to hybrid warfare. This is a new phenomenon. I also will acknowledge that we are probably starting late on this. We are behind many countries. India perhaps is one example. But let me also draw a distinction for you between what we've discovered India is doing and what we would do even when we are 10 times better than we are in information warfare. We would still be using tools within the bounds of international law. We would still be using tools within the bounds of international customs and norms. We are not a state that is going to go rogue just to draw sadistic pleasure out of something. That's what India has been doing. At the end of the day, that is what shows your character as a nation. And I'm afraid we are dealing with a neighbor who can stoop as low as it gets just to hurt Pakistan. That's what we've seen here. So yes, I mean, if we are weak on something within this information warfare, fifth generation warfare space, we will improve. And all countries are doing that, and we must do that. Introspection for every country is necessary to learn lessons from mistakes, and the Indian operation was a fairly sophisticated one. And so, absolutely, we at the very least need to be fully prepared to counter it anytime it happens. I think we are way ahead of what most people would think, because these things don't come out in public. But yes, there's room for improvement, and we continue to do that.
Well, it was a sophisticated operation. It is a sophisticated operation, all right. And I'm not sure whether there are any rules of the game here. But let's move on. So one of the interesting aspects of Indian Chronicles is that this disinformation operation to influence EU views about Pakistan negatively began nearly 15 years ago, i.e. in 2005, 2006. That's when we thought relations had tremendously improved. Now, what does that tell us about India's approach to Pakistan?
Timing, frankly, is with the improvement of the US-India relationship. I mean, I sat in the US, as you know, for a number of years, and it was quite striking how blatantly any negative news about India would be pushed under the rug. And at the same time, when it came to India-Pakistan, there would be only one view, and that would be India's. There was definitely a sense that this is more than just organic narrative making. Money was going into it. Now we know people were being fooled, duped, cheated, and frankly, there were groups of people who call themselves Pakistanis who may have actually knowingly or unknowingly very much supported this effort. So, this was a maze, and it's really the emboldenment, I think, that India got in terms of its lobbying in the US and that relationship which opened up its space to do this. Why Europe? My own guess is because the approach in Europe is fairly open, it's lax, they value these kind of freedoms, and of course then it opens up space for them to be misused. As a great example of how India has cheated, quite frankly, the entire European Union. And I'm very glad that an inquiry has been ordered. We know what the result is going to be, we know the facts, but it's very important that this is taken to its logical conclusion in that sense. As far as India, Pakistan and the improvement, I think the answer is in your question. You can't trust this state. You can't trust the fact that they tell us, oh, well, Pakistan, look, it talks, but then anything that goes wrong in India is Pakistan's fault. Well, this is what a two-faced state behaves as, and we have evidence now.
Right. So I have another concern, frankly, as a journalist also, and as someone who looks into, call it hybrid war, call it fifth-gen war, whatever, names don't really matter. Now, my concern is that if such an operation were launched by Pakistan and had got discovered, the Indian government and media would have cried blue murder all over the globe. Our media has been mostly quiet about it. What has the government done in this regard?
What is the government doing about it? I think the question is asked should be, what is the media doing about it? It's a big struggle for somebody like me, sitting in an office that doesn't have a political brief, is pushing only national issues when it comes to strategic thinking and strategy and all. It's disappointing sometimes, frankly, to get 5 minutes on TV for Kashmir or for something like this. It's a struggle where somebody like me would hope that this would be an automatic. So I'm not blaming anybody. I think media has its own compulsions. There must be good reasons why the focus is mostly on domestic issues and sometimes on polarizing issues. But I do still hope and wish that whenever there are such national issues, especially ones that the world needs to hear about, nothing else should come ahead of that. But why that doesn't happen, frankly, I think your side has to answer that more than mine.
Yeah, our side does not really have the capacity, but that's quite frankly another issue altogether. But let me go back to what you said about rules. I'm not sure if there are any rules, and that's what I'm going to ask my experts. But given that, are you implying that there's some criminality involved in this operation, in this Indian op?
Definitely there's criminality involved. Look, identity theft in the Western world, people stay in jail for years and years just for that. Here you're talking much more. You're talking scams, you're talking duping of the UN system, you're talking of the EU parliamentarians being fooled, and they have, by the way, already ordered an inquiry. When that happens, the result we know, but it will confirm again on in terms of the depth of the deception and the nefarious agenda behind this. Look, there are diplomatic options, there are legal options, but a lot of those actually will be exercised by the people or the states that have been wronged. It's the EU territories, it's the laws that will apply there. It's not Pakistan that has to do all of this. But certainly, diplomatically, should such a country be in the UN Security Council? Is that fair? We need to raise this question. There are questions with the EU Parliament, the UN, and delisting of the NGOs. There are a number of avenues here. We are looking at those, and whatever is legitimate and the Pakistani state should pursue. I've been saying this again and again. We are pursuing unapologetic, bold, and pragmatic diplomacy. That's what we will do.
Thank you. That was Dr. Moeed Yusuf. Let me now go to Ramsha Jahangi, but I'm also joined by Matthew Warren, a professor who's a cybersecurity expert, joins me from Melbourne. Ramsha, thanks for taking out the time. Could you give us a broad brush appraisal of what this op was/is about, because it's still continuing, before we get to some specifics?
Thank you. So last year, the first set of report by EU Disinfo came out, which uncovered 265 fake media outlets and dubious think tanks and NGOs that were involved in producing content designed to undermine Pakistan. This year, in a follow-up investigation, they realized that the network is actually much bigger and the scope is much larger than what they thought last year. This time, they've said that internationally, the network was working to damage the reputation of rival countries, including Pakistan and China, and benefit from support from international institutions such as the European Union and United Nations. And to do so, the network used fake personas of dead human rights activists, journalists, tried to impersonate regular media and press agencies such as the EU Observer, The Economist, and Voice of America. They also used the letterhead of the European Parliament and registered websites under fake phone numbers, provided fake addresses, and so on. Overall, the network had comprised of over 500 fake local media outlets in 95 countries. And the operation has actually covered 116 countries and 9 regions if you talk about the overall impact.
Right. Stay with me, Ramsha. Let me also pull in Professor Warren into this discussion. Professor Warren, this is classic weaponization of information. What do you think of this? I mean, before you joined us, I was actually quoting from the foreword to the report. And frankly, the investigators said, well, we're just astounded by the sheer scale of this.
What's of interest is that the campaign has been in place since 2005. Historically, these types of information operation campaigns that we've seen have been very short term. They've usually been linked to elections or political events. The fact that this campaign's been going on for 15 years and the scope of it, in terms of, the 550 fake websites, the 750 fake media organizations in 116 countries, it takes a large scale of organization and coordination. But it's interesting to see how the Indian media's responded to this. The Indian media's actually been attacking Pakistan about the report, actually saying Pakistan is the problem, not India. So it's even interesting to see, even from a perception management perspective, how governments are trying to change it. We've certainly seen with the recent 2020 China-Indian clashes with their borders, a very successful social media campaign by India to put forward their message across, so that they certainly have that capability. The issue is whether this network is directly connected to the Indian government, or whether it's connected to what are called cyber militia or networks of online activists. And that's going to be the biggest problem. The biggest issue with cybersecurity is always the issue of attribution. So to be able to determine who was responsible for the incident and when and where, that's always the biggest challenge.
Right. Ramsha, Professor Warren is saying two very interesting things. One about the duration, 15 years. I mean, he said, well, you go in, you do something, you get out, kind of a thing. But here we have 15 years of operation. It still continues, despite 2019 expose, as I said, by the EU Disinfo lab. And the second is how India is turning it around and perception management. Now the third question, with reference to who exactly is behind this, given the sophistication and the scale of this operation, and perhaps the money that this would require over such a long period of time, it does seem that it requires a sophisticated intelligence agency to sort of, get people to front this. What are your thoughts about these three aspects that, I've spoken about?
So firstly, about the Indian media, the report even mentions the involvement of India's largest wire agency, the ANI, which was recirculating content critical of Pakistan that was generated by these fake media outlets run by the network that we were talking about. So it's also because they found 13 instances of ANI publishing mostly anti-Pakistan and sometimes anti-China op-eds that were written by these MEP, the members of European Parliament, on EU Chronicle, which is one of the news articles that the network was running. So there is obviously this direct involvement of Indian media outlets in running and also recirculating and reinforcing the pro-India and anti-Pakistan narrative. And in reaction to the report also, like the professor pointed out, they have actually in turn blamed Pakistan. And again, once again, they're reinforcing the same narrative that Pakistan is using proxies or this investigation to get back at India. So definitely there is a large involvement of Indian media outlets. Moving on to the second aspect of it is, of course, I mean, even the researchers of EU Disinfo have pointed out that it takes more than a few computers to plan and sustain such an action. Even after they unearthed the initial network last year, they said there were no real consequences. Yes, they were exposed, but nothing real was actually done about it. And this is what they fear will happen to this investigation as well. Because even so, now that the larger network has been covered on international media as well as local, you can see that it hasn't been covered as extensively as it deserves to be. So this is one of their fears as well, that there will be no consequences to this network. And it's interesting, like one of the fake news outlets of theirs, once it was exposed, they discontinued the operation, but then they reproduced it under a different name. So they're replicating and continuing to do so despite being exposed, and nothing is being done about it. So that's definitely a concern that we should be thinking about, and international institutions should be thinking about and come up with a relevant framework that discourages and sanctions these networks from engaging in disinformation and abusing international platforms such as the UNHRC or EU.
Absolutely. In fact, there's a cascading effect. I was just reading from your report in Dawn, and you wrote that you talked about the ANI, and you said some Indian media outlets which reuse content from ANI become a de facto regular amplifier from EU Chronicle. So you know, that's another aspect of this operation, and I guess that's the central plank of it. But let me go back to Professor Warren here. So Professor Warren, this should obviously worry Pakistan. Pakistan has, the Foreign Office has made a statement also, the government is also planning some action. But since you deal with issues in this area, what really are the rules of the game, if any? I mean, is there any criminality involved in this kind of things, resurrecting dead people, faking addresses, phone numbers, you know, faking NGOs, and, you know, lots of other stuff that, you know, the report has brought out?
It's certainly very hard. Historically, what we've seen with these type of incidences is there's been no legal outcome. It's unethical, and we've seen you know, a lot of public outcry. So what these incidences are not is something called a hack and dump. So what it isn't is that servers are being hacked, information is being stolen and dumped, which is what we've seen in with Russia in the previous US elections. So this is classic information operations, information manipulation. So it's very hard to put forward a legal case around this. As I said, the issue around attribution, the issue about, you know, the actual harm that's been done from a criminal perspective, it is going to be hard to prove. And even, you know, cases like identity theft, online identity theft, historically has been very difficult to prosecute cases. This is why in cyber cases we see so few prosecutions because they're actually very hard to collect all the forensic evidence to prosecute people in terms of the incident. What it does highlight is the role that regulators have in terms of, the fact that social media platforms are being used to amplify and reshare information. They certainly have a major contribution to this process, that they need to be able to identify which of these entities are using their platforms to reshare information or to host accounts and actually close them down. So by making it public, what you're doing is holding those social media companies accountable, holding the companies that are hosting those websites also accountable. But as your other guest mentioned, the problem you have with these types of attacks is once you've shut down a site, it's so easy to open another site.
That's exactly what
in a country, and
that's exactly what they've been doing. One final question, Professor Warren, before I let you go. Now, you obviously explained how this works or how certain things can't really work. So in the event, what should be Pakistan's response, to all these sort of investigations and the expose?
Really, what the response is to be as public as you can, to share what the investigations are, to share the outcomes, to actually share, information about the fake stories. Where we have seen in European countries, where they've dealt successfully with these type of information operations, what they do is that they publicly out each situation. They have sites, publicly disclosing where the fraud is happening or where the information disclosure is happening, because that's the problem with fake news and these types of attacks. Once you bring it to the public attention and defraud it as being fake, it starts then to lose its value. And that's what Pakistan would need to do, is ensure that people are continuously, aware that this is an information operations, a fake news situation. So when incidents are found out, that they should be made public and they should be attributed to particular countries or to particular entities in those countries.
Right. So that was Professor Matthew Warren speaking with us. Let me go back to Ramsha. Ramsha, you write about these things. You obviously studied all of this. How does one develop the capacity to counter this? I mean, I talked about the fact that the media did not really cover this story. I think your report in Dawn is probably the most comprehensive. I mean, and as I said, the Indian government, the Indian media would have cried blue murder, if the shoe were on the other foot. So how can we develop the capacity to counter this? And now that this has happened, do we have the capacity to actually sort of propagate what India has been doing over the past 15 years in terms of these info ops?
I would like to slightly also disagree, maybe not as comprehensively, but the issue has been very rightly so raised in Pakistan, both by the government and the media. In fact, the Indian Chronicles was even trending on Twitter for a couple of days after the report came out. So there has been a lot of coverage, but in the long run, I think what eventually works is perception building diplomatically on diplomatic forums and platforms which the Indian network has been using for lobbying efforts. This is not just about media coverage, it's about lobbying consistently outside the EU. They were using NGOs. Like I said, they've registered fake NGOs and beyond just media outlets. So there was also offline efforts diplomatically that the Indian network was indulged in. So Pakistan also needs to increase capacity in terms of lobbying outside these platforms that matter, involve the UN and the EU forums. So that's one area that we should definitely expand our scope to, besides media coverage and perception management, to amplify our perception management.
Yeah, I know. I mean, on the media, this was trending, but I was referring more to the television channels that we have, where the story wasn't really covered. Because one of the things that I think is also about, sort of doing it so many times that it actually creates some kind of critical mass. Is that something you would agree with?
Absolutely, absolutely. And there is room to even do such investigations. And that's one of the areas where we lag behind, that we don't have as many think tanks and researchers looking into the area of information warfare. It's quite unfortunate that a Brussels-based NGO research group had to come up with this investigation, and we couldn't do it locally. So that also reflects on where we are lacking. And definitely we need to increase and look into these and try and expose more and more networks ourselves.
Absolutely. So much. That was Ramsha Jahangi speaking with us. We shall take a short break and return to continue discussing our big story tonight, an Indian disinformation op against Pakistan that went on for nearly 15 years and has been unearthed by EU Disinfo Lab, an independent non-profit organization that monitors and exposes such fakery. Stay with us. Welcome back to In Focus. We continue with our discussion of an Indian disinformation op against Pakistan that went on for nearly 15 years and has been unearthed by EU Disinfo Lab, an independent non-profit organization that monitors and exposes such fakery. Such is the scale and complexity of the op that the investigators say they were astounded by it. Let me reproduce what the EU Disinfo Lab has to say about this op before I get to my guess. Now, it says, last year we uncovered a network of 265 fake media in 65 countries reproducing negative content about Pakistan online. This network was created by malicious actors who were behind EP Today, which is European Parliament Today, a fake European Parliament magazine active in Brussels since 2006. And this self-proclaimed magazine for the European Parliament in Brussels was serving as a honeypot for members of the European Parliament and other politicians who could use it to publish their views, particularly those views that would serve Indian interests and undermine Pakistan. Some of these MEPs and other politicians attended United Nations side events, press conferences and demonstrations in Geneva organized by minority rights NGOs, all set up by the same actors, such as the European Organization for Pakistani Minorities, and it goes on. So, as we discussed in the first segment, it was a highly sophisticated operation, and it went on for 15 long years. So let's now get to our discussion. I'm joined by Pierluigi Paganini, a cybersecurity and intelligence expert, and Dr. Kamran Bokhari, Director of Analytical Development at the Center for Global Policy. Dr. Bokhari is also a national security and foreign policy specialist. Thank you to both panelists. Let me begin with Pierluigi here. Pierluigi, a couple of things are very interesting. Normally, and I was earlier discussing this on the program, people come in with this info op thing, they kind of do something, then they get out. Like perhaps the Russian operation with reference to the US election and so on and so forth. But this has been spread over 15 years, and despite the 2019 expose, it continues. So that is one interesting aspect of this. And the second is the perception management, where the Indian government is saying that Pakistan is using proxies to blame India. So in other words, that EU Disinfo Lab is a Pakistani operation against India. So give me your reading of what is going on here.
First of all, we have to say that disinformation campaign represent an important aspect of modern warfare because they give the attackers the opportunity to weaponize the information. These campaigns are orchestrated by government to influence the sentiment of certain individuals or entire population about specific topics or destabilize governments. Disinformation are part of an ancient military doctrine known as psychological operation, and today is very efficient due to the technology. World Wide Web, social network, instant messaging platform allow nation-state actors to carry out surgical disinformation campaign, targeting individuals and specific people worldwide instantaneously. Regarding the Indian Chronicles operation, I believe that this is one of the most powerful disinformation campaign. It is a 15 years long operation that involved networks of created NGO, think tanks, fake news media outlets. These network aimed at influencing the European institutions, enforcing the image of India and support the anti-Pakistan interests. For sure, street actors behind this campaign used a network of fake and stolen identities and sometimes resurrected prominent figures. I have no doubt that the street actors demonstrated to be very skilled with the huge resources that allowed them to fly under the radar for more than 10 years. For this reason, it's my opinion that they represent a serious threat to Pakistan.
Absolutely. Kamran, you obviously have a lot of expertise in looking at intelligence operations. Now, 15 years spread, the level of sophistication and complexity of the operation obviously requires money. Do you really think that this was not being conducted through proxies by a sophisticated intelligence agency?
I would say yes. I mean, the likelihood is extremely high because, as Pierluigi just said, that there's a advanced level of tradecraft display here. The fact that this started somewhere around circa 2005 suggests that you have a long-term planning. There are lots of resources. Obviously, these are like civil society actors that are created, perhaps advocacy groups, think tanks, and so on and so forth, NGOs, peddling information and shaping news media, making contacts with journalists, establishing long-term relations. This isn't your quick go-in info op and then get out, as you mentioned with earlier in the segment, referencing the Russian interference in the 2016 U.S. elections. This was done long term. You can't do it until you have the infrastructure to do this, and this has to have a certain level of state backing, because to my mind, I don't know what non-state actor would be. You could establish, if you're a non-state actor, you're a businessman, you can establish a think tank, you can establish an advocacy group, but to have a network that extensive over such a large geography, that's not within the capabilities of any NGO. There has to be state actor involvement.
There has to be a state actor involved in this. Right. Pierluigi, this is classic weaponization of information. Now, obviously, Pakistan is concerned, but how much should Pakistan be worried about this?
I believe that it represents a serious threat. As you know, today we are assisting to several operations like that. I can tell you that we have monitored several misinformation campaigns in Europe orchestrated by Chinese actors, Russian threat actors. These campaigns were aimed at spreading fake news about 5G technology and coronavirus. But India Chronicles campaign outstands for its complexity because its long-line campaign with a huge investments, and is targeting specific issues related to Indian communities. They are working to destabilize the opinion in European countries about your country, about Pakistan. And it's a very huge threat, in my opinion. This is a threat also to the sovereignty of the states. Misinformation campaign today can create a serious problem. So they must be approached with any kind of tools, instruments, cyber capabilities. It's a very huge threat to Pakistan.
Absolutely. Kamran, what should be Pakistan's response? And I ask this because given the level of sophistication of the operation, and given, unfortunately, the fact that we really do not have the capacity, how should we counter this? I mean, what exactly can we do?
So there are a number of fronts, Ijaz. One of them is that the state of Pakistan has to invest in countering information operations. I know this is not an analogy, but I just want to point out that the United States government in the last 5 to 7 years has established what is called a Global Engagement Center, GEC. It is housed in the State Department. It's a congressionally mandated entity, interagency entity that counters information operations, specifically looking at Russia, China, Iran, and ISIS and other counterterrorism efforts. So even the United States, with such resources, has recently dedicated its energies to countering information operations, because this is the warfare of the future, as one of your earlier commentators was pointing out. So that's one thing. The other thing is that civil society needs to become more active. There has to be far more freedom of expression in Pakistan, where the intelligentsia, where civil society actors, think tanks, NGOs, are basically telling their story. Look, it's an old saying: if you won't sing your song, others will write a song for you, or if you won't tell your story, others will tell your story. So Pakistan has no choice but to actually up its game in telling its narrative.
Right. Do you also think, I mean, given the fact that in the Pakistani media, this wasn't really a hot topic. I mean, I've been saying this, that if this were a Pakistani op that got discovered, the Indian government and the Indian media would have cried blue murder across the globe. Now, is that something that we need to do in terms of getting this to reach some kind of critical mass in terms of putting out this big story?
I mean, look, in recent years, there's been so much hype created in the Pakistani media about fifth-generation warfare. Look, this is it, okay? This is the real fifth-generation warfare. And in a world that we live in where every actor, every country in the world is preparing for this, Pakistan, it should also do the same. But it requires a shifting of focus and resources.
Right. Let me go back to Pierluigi before I wrap this up. Pierluigi, what is the landscape here in terms of any rules of the game, any legal codes? Is there some kind of criminality involved in this operation that perhaps can be invoked by Pakistan?
I can tell you that we have worked when I was in a G7 group that was arranged 3 years ago in Italy. I was in a group that was trying to propose the normal state behavior in the cyberspace, proposing specific rules to be that were promoting the collaboration in order to debunk misinformation campaign, in order to prevent any kind of abuse of technology in the cyberspace. Regarding the questions about the criminality, I can tell you that there is a thin line between nation-state actors and the cybercrime organization. Sometimes the state-sponsored hackers could leverage cybercrime as a service in order to carry out what we call hit-and-run operation. And this kind of operation can benefit of cybercrime tools and services in order to make hard the attribution to specific threat actors. They use them as a sort of proxy. Anyway, in this specific case, I have no doubt that we are facing with nation-state activity and not financial motivated.
Right. Thank you so much. That was Pierluigi Paganini. Thank you also to Dr. Kamran Bokhari. This is all from In Focus tonight. We shall see you tomorrow at the same time. Keep following our latest updates on social media at indus.news. Good night and goodbye.